Hi, I'm Larry Puckett, the DCC Guy. Today on the DCC Guy, I want to take a look at ways to control your turnouts, including the ever-popular Tortoise switch machine, but we'll also look at some manual methods as well. So stick around while I get things set up here on the workbench and we'll get started. Okay, what I want to do is start with a system that's been available literally for decades and used by model railroaders, I think probably since the 1930s. And that's this solenoid-based type of a switch machine. And this is one I've taken the cover off so you can see it, so I can give you an idea of how these things work. Basically, you've got two coils of wire here with a steel rod going between them or through the center of them. And when one side is electrified, the steel rod is pulled towards it, activating this control here, or this lever that controls your turnout. And then when it's activated this side, then it pulls back the other way and the lever moves in the other direction. So that allows you to move your points on your layout fairly equally. There's another one that's got its cover on. This is your basic Pico design. This is still made. These were made by Rick's products, and unfortunately, the market for these types of switch machines in the United States is practically non-existent now. And I asked him, if he planned to ever make these again, and he said no, that he just can't produce them for a market that is non-existent. Nobody wants to buy these, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Pico, though, in the UK, does still produce these switch machines, or these solenoid-based switch machines for use with their turnout. They're designed to attach underneath of some of their turnouts, and they've got these little prongs built in that allow you to attach them to the bottom of the turnout itself. And then again, you've got these two black areas here are two electromagnets with this rod that moves back and forth between them depending on which of the electromagnets is electrified. Probably something that's fairly well known to a lot of people in the United States anyway are these solenoid-based controllers that come with various N-scale and HO turnouts that Atlas produces. And they work the same way. They've got a couple of coils inside that form the electromagnet. And then when the steel rod moves back and forth, this little guy here, this little lever, I don't know if you can see it move, but it's moving back and forth. I can use that, I can move it manually to show this. So these are still available and are still in use. What is the issue with these, though? There's two things with these. First of all, the electromagnets can require a lot of power. Some of them, like the little Atlas ones, can run off of a small power supply, and you can actually run this one off of a 9-volt battery. But in order for most of these to operate, and the ones that were made in the past, you need what's called a capacitive discharge circuit, which had a large capacitor, and when you triggered it, you had a sudden burst of electricity come out, and that would activate the electromagnet temporarily, and it would move the points. The problem with that, these are also known as snap switches, and they snap left and right once that capacitive discharge occurs. And that snapping action over time has been blamed for actually breaking the points in your turnouts, because they are pushed very quickly and with considerable force up against the main rails. And that's the biggest criticism I've heard of these, other than the fact that they do require quite a bit of power to operate in some cases. So they're not available in general anymore in the United States. The Pico, you can still find these in the US, find them a lot more in the UK and probably in Europe. Okay, let's set those solenoid-based systems aside and take a look at what really is one of the most popular systems today, and that's the Tortoise slow motion switch motor. And the way this works is it's got a couple of contacts here. The black and the white are the contacts that drive a slow motion motor. And that motor moves this little arm and this lever here, which goes up through the bottom of the layout and controls the turnout points. So it's a very slow moving action, and at the end of the throw we've got this wire here which tends to cushion the movement of the points themselves. Okay, so you don't get that quick snapping action that you get with, say, the Pico points, or the Pico motor, excuse me. Also on these turnouts, you have a number of other contacts. You can see here the red, the yellow, and the green contacts that wires I've got to these contacts. These are a single pole double throw mechanism inside. It's an electrical switch basically that allows you to control the polarity of the frog itself. And then there's another one over here, so you can use one for controlling polarity of the frog, another to control a signal light, to turn a light red or green, that type of thing, and to provide feedback, any number of things that electrical that a switch can do, you can do with these. So this is a really nice design. These are very reliable. They've been on the market for decades now, and there's even a new version called the Smale, which has a built-in DCC accessory decoder so that you can control it without having to install a separate accessory decoder. Now the great thing about these slow motion motors is at the end of their travel, the motor basically stays on, but it stalls. Okay, and at that point it still is only using about 20 milliamps. So you can control and power a lot of these Tortoise switch machines with, a 1 amp power supply. So they're very economical as far as power goes. They're also easy to control. I did a video series back in August of 2019 on building control panels for controlling these type of switch machines. So I'll go ahead and add a link to that series here in the video for you, and go back and take a look at what it takes to control these. And the great thing is you can set up accessory decoders to set up routes through yards and up ladders and do all kinds of neat things with these. Okay. Now, something that is sort of a takeoff on the Tortoise are these Blue Point controllers. And you can see this one, it has the same type of lever arm here. It's got this mechanism for controlling the throw distance of the rod itself. And it's actually activated by this push rod mechanism. So there's this little push rod device that goes through the center of it, throws the arm here, and that controls the movement of the throw rod that goes up to your points. And then to activate this, you simply use a push rod mechanism like you can buy at radio control cars and airplane stores. And basically you just put a control knob on your fascia to push that in and out, and that controls your switch points. So it's an entirely manual system. Another neat thing about this is underneath here it has this double pole double throw switch. So just like the Tortoise, you can control the polarity of the frog and also have another set of contacts to use for controlling a signal light or to provide feedback to a computer or things of that nature. So these are a fairly neat little system, as long as you don't want to or need to electrify and control your turnouts from, say, a computer system using JMRI's Panel Pro, for example. So they're a pretty neat system in that respect. Another manual system that some people use on their layouts are these Caboose ground throws, and they basically work similarly to a real ground throw on the prototype railroads. And when you throw the little arm here, it moves this throw rod that is connected to your points, and that allows your operators to reach in and control their turnouts. Now, I don't like them because it does allow you, or requires your operators, to go poking around in the middle of your scenes on your model railroad. So you typically end up with a lot. I have a friend who has a large model railroad, and he told me that after every operating session, he has to go around repairing signs and fences and all kinds of other things that people knock over while they're trying to move these. So that's why I do not like these type of mechanical throws. I have 2 of them on my layout, and I don't use them at all anyway. And that's the great thing about, these remote control type systems. Nobody is reaching in to your layout and breaking things, knocking cars over, knocking locomotives over, and doing things of that nature. It's controlled from the control panel on your layout or from a push-pull knob on the fascia. Okay, so those are there are various other types of these stall motors available. And one thing I do want to point out and warn you about, these only draw 20 milliamps. There are others I know that draw 40 milliamps or more. So be careful. Always think about that when you're getting ready to purchase a motorized system. Know what the current draw is on that motor, especially if you're going to be using it with DCC accessory decoders. Because a lot of these accessory decoders, they can probably only supply maybe 40 milliamps at the most. So you might be able to control 2 tortoises with it. But maybe if you've got another type of machine that draws 60 milliamps, you might not be able to use it with an accessory decoder. So you need to check into that. I also want to point out that there are accessory decoders out there made by most of the major companies that are also capable of the capacitive discharge current required for these Pico and other types of solenoid-based switch machines. So that's something to be aware of. If you do have, say, the Atlas type system, that there are accessory decoders for controlling these. And I know NCE makes them, Digitrax makes them, and I'm sure others as well. Okay, finally, a more recent develop in this system, or in the number of systems available, are these servo-based type system. Now, this is an old Futaba servo that came out of a radio-controlled glider I used to have. And there's a lot of companies now, or a few companies getting into producing servos for throwing turnouts. If you look at the Tam Valley Depot website, those are the guys that make the frog juicers. They have a large number of products available for controlling servos and for use on model railroads, so you might want to take a look at those. This is the new Walthers system, came out in 2019, I believe it was, and it basically uses a small micro server here on the back, and that mechanism controls a throw rod similar to the one on the Tortoise, and it has an on-off type operation, so that when this servo comes to the end of its throw, there's an on-off switch here and here, which turns that off, and then just the tension of the servo holds the points in place, as opposed to the stall motors, which the motor is still active and pushing against the points, and it is stalled in place and keeps that tension on the points themselves. So this is a real nice system that Walthers has come up with, and it has push buttons, controllers, power supplies. It's a complete system that you can buy into and start using, and it seems to work fairly well. We had an article in Model Railroader, I believe it was in 2019, early 2019, by Eric White on how to install these on a layout. And they're very straightforward. This particular one is made to be installed in a vertical orientation, similar to a Tortoise switch machine, but they now have a version that can be installed horizontally. And you could probably make a bracket for these to install one of these horizontally and then just bend the throw rod upwards. So there's a lot of options out there available. These don't take a lot of power, for one thing, because they turn off at the end of their throw and then on again when you push a button to activate them. And the Tortoise and similar type stall motor switch machines, 20, 30 milliamps is probably the max on these. And of course, you can't beat a manual system that requires no power. So that should give you a pretty good idea of what's available, and I hope I've provided you with a pretty good idea of the pros and cons of each type. Well, I hope that gives you a better feeling for what's available on the market today for controlling turnouts on your layout. There's a few things to be considered when you're making a choice for the type of system that you want to use on your layout. So I hope I've laid out at least some pros and cons for you to think about. So have a good week, and we'll see you here later on with another video.